talk together. And you might ask, what's the overlap between the Healthcare Society, who runs this Here's to Your Good Health series, and the Conservancy. And there's lots of overlap, right? I mean, one overlap is everything the Conservancy does increases our good health. They're conserving not only all the biodiversity and ecosystems, but they're making it a nice place for us to live. So there's lots of overlap there. But there's some more sinister overlap. And that is that wildlife out there that they're trying to preserve can be a reservoir for zoonoses. Lovely word, zoonosis. Zoonosis is human disease passed on from animals. So there's some sinister side to the Conservancy. And so I'm going to actually ask the leader of the Conservancy, Helen, to come up and explain about that and to introduce our speaker. So,
thanks, Peter.
Go ahead.
Thanks, Peter. Yes, I'm Erin O'Brien with the Pender Conservancy, the sinister Pender Conservancy. So I wanted to welcome Dr. Helen Schwantje. Is it good enough?
Yep, okay. Well done.
To Pender, where she has not been since, what, the 80s? A couple decades.
Late 80s, yep.
So Helen was the provincial wildlife vet for BC from 1992 to 2021, and though retired, she continues as emeritus and is in fact very busy, as we were learning this evening, as I'm sure many retired folks in this room can relate to upon retirement. So she's doing contracts and volunteering for governments and NGOs on a variety of wildlife health issues. So we're going to learn about some of those today. We wanted to invite her to Penders to start a discussion about wildlife, particularly deer, health and implications of high deer population density for health of humans living around them, as Peter alluded to. So I won't take any more time. There's going to be a lot of discussion here, a lot of time for questions as well. So hopefully we have a good discussion, and it's the start of hopefully more discussions in the community to come. So thank you for coming.
I used to come here in the late 80s, early 90s as a veterinarian, a private practitioner, and I worked for a clinic in Colwood that was run by an old roommate of mine, and I would come every other weekend and do dogs and cats and horses and cows and pigs and whatever. Life has changed on Pender. You now have another roommate of mine giving veterinary services, Gord Oudman. So I have still a strong connection through my veterinary sinister nature. I've never been called sinister before, but I really like it. And but my career as a wildlife vet was a little different and never did bring me to Pender. It brought me to a few other islands, but not to Pender. But there are some common links. One of them, we'll talk about that later. But to start with, I was given a lot of leeway by Erin in terms of what I should talk about. So what I'm going to be talking about is going to be cleared up by, let's see if this thing works. No, it doesn't. Okay, fine. There are more ways to skin a cat. There we go. So as an overview, I'm going to introduce myself a little bit further than that. I'm going to give you a few definitions. We're going to talk about wildlife and emerging diseases, as well as that whole area of zoonoses that Peter referred to. We're going to talk a little bit about disease risk, and then I'm going to talk about a little bit more details. I want to give you a warning that some of these slides are not pleasant. But hey, you ask a woman who has made her career cutting up dead things, you're going to get some dead things on the screen. And if you don't like it, just close your eyes or go to the bathroom or walk out of the room, but I'll make it as interesting as possible. I do want to tell you that I am a vet, and I do have some technical background. So if I use words that you don't understand, please just put your hand up, because somebody else is going to be in the same boat as you and may not understand that. And I want you to walk out of this room being a little bit more educated and a little bit more familiar with some of these technical terms, because you will hear them. And you will, hopefully, by the end of tonight, be a little bit more engaged in the subject of wildlife health and wildlife disease, and human health and disease. Yeah, I may have to struggle with this a little bit. So, can you hear me well?
Yes.
Okay, that's a good thing. No, I'm gonna wander around a little bit, but I can sit. I may end up sitting. I got a cramp in my leg. So this is me. I was born in Victoria. I was raised in Victoria, and it was during that time when you rode your bike everywhere. You went and built rafts on the ocean. Nobody cared where you were. Nobody worried about you. Of course, I was one of 6 kids, so my mother was tired of children and didn't really give a shit anyway. But I really bonded with animals, and so I have worked on all kinds of different species. I really like the photo bomb in the back of that one, but I transitioned to another world. This is me and a good colleague working on wood bison up near the Liard Hot Springs many, many years ago. I was very passionate about wildlife, and even though I was told I would never get a job in it, I created a job in the government, and as a matter of fact, that job was the second full-time wildlife vet in Canada and the first for a female. In those days, there were very few women vets, and I guess I was a little bit of a breaker of new ground. I had done my vet degree through Saskatchewan, and then did some crazy traveling and working in various places. Went back to school and did a master's on bighorn sheep health at Saskatoon. Came back to Vancouver Island because I'd run out of money, and I was finishing my master's with a pen, you know, in those days, right? And but I wanted to do wildlife desperately, and I got a phone call one night. And this guy said, "Hey, do you know how to drug moose?" Never drugged a moose in my life. I went, "Absolutely." And he said, "Would you like to come up to northern BC and drug? We've got to put some collars on moose, and I hear you could do that." And I said, "Well, what did you hear about me?" He said, "I heard you could get drugs and you were fun to work with." It's like, I'm your girl. So packed up my bags, flew to Smithers, got off the plane, walked right up to this guy. And he walked right towards me, and I said, "How did you know it was me?" He said, "Well, all vets wear plaid." And he said, "How did you know it was me?" And I said, "Well, all biologists wear plaid." And he's here tonight. Dave and I caught, what was it, 30 moose in a week? Not even a week, like 2 days. And I showed him how to do rectal exams for pregnancy, and he showed me where moose lived in the Spatsizi area, and it started a great career together for a few years, and then you ran out of money. And then I got a job.
I think you were always fun, though.
Was I fun, Dave?
Oh, yeah.
Okay, good. So, very odd seeing Dave and Allison here, because that's a whole nother world for me. And then somebody else walks up, Richard walks up, and he goes, "You taught me how to drug animals like 30 years ago." And it's like, oh my God. This is a really interesting crowd, and I'm sure none of you I ever did any vet work for other than those 4 people, but I'm really, really happy you turned out. So I was going to try to make time for you to introduce yourselves, but I have already babbled on for way too long already. So if we have time at the end of the night, I'd love you to come up and talk to me and tell me some of your stories. But right now, my job is to entertain you and educate you a little bit. Let's talk about some definitions. Peter was right. Zoonotic disease, or zoonosis, is a disease of animals that's transmitted to people. There are many of them, and we'll talk about some of them specifically. A pathogen is an agent that causes disease. It could be a fungus, it could be a parasite, it could be a virus. So it's just a general term. Risk, how do you define that? It's some kind of an exposure to a danger. And it can be causing harm or loss, but I think we all know what risk is, right? Lots of different kinds of risks. If there are any other terms I use, again, please ask. And my warning is about the photographs. This picture here is we're transporting a couple of young grizzly bears, and you'll notice one of us has a mask on. In this case, the disease risk is pretty minimal. We're using protective mechanisms like gloves and masks, but I'm much more likely to get a disease from her than from the bear because I'm in more close contact with her, and bears really don't have a lot of zoonotic diseases unless you want to eat them. Do you know what disease you can get from a bear? Trichinella. There's a parasite that lives in their muscle that can infect you and cause a lovely diarrhea. Usually not fatal. Sometimes can be. One of my professors used this term. When you move the animal, you move the zoo. And that just refers to anytime you move something, you move everything that's inside of it and on top of it at the same time. So one of the reasons why we see a lot of diseases is that, whoops, is there any way we can adjust that?
It's not the screen. Right to the projector.
Just the projector's a little bit, the angle's a bit off. Sorry. Oh, perfect. Excellent. Thank you so much. There's nothing that's more irritating when you can't read your own slides. So yes, we've moved animals around. We've colonized, we've settled a new country, a new continent with our domesticated animals and ourselves, and we move diseases and parasites with us. Disease in wildlife, when I first started learning about them, people said, oh, it's all normal. It's only wolves that kill caribou. Well, if you don't look, you don't find. And quite often, wildlife diseases are ignored unless there's some kind of an economic impact on humans or livestock or the economy in general. These days, there's a lot more interest in wildlife diseases. And it's not because wildlife vets are more common or wildlife vets are more influential. It's just simply that people are moving a lot more. And as they move, sometimes legally or illegally, they move animals with them. Those particular behaviors have huge impacts on biodiversity. We also have increased expertise both in the lab and in general. In the past, we could not diagnose things without putting things under microscopes or culturing organisms, etc. Now we have tools like PCR, where we have a tiny, tiny bit of genetic material. We can multiply it enough times that we can identify it. Just like a COVID test tells you immediately whether you have COVID or not. Same thing, same kind of tools are used now with animals for genetic reasons, for pathogen diagnoses, all of those things. So it's made a big difference. And some of these diseases are increasingly more expensive on human society as well as livestock and the way we feed ourselves. So that is one of the reasons why there's a lot more interest in wildlife diseases. There's a term called emerging wildlife diseases, and these are diseases that are newly recognized. If you look at the literature, and I'm sure you're all looking at coronavirus literature, there are many, many different kinds in many, many different groups of animals, but especially in people, they have had significant impacts on people. SARS, COVID, all of those. We have high pathogenic avian influenza, HPAI, Ebola virus, Marburg virus, West Nile, monkeypox, chronic wasting disease. All of those diseases have impacted humans, maybe not directly, but also indirectly. And some of those, the reason why they've emerged is because they're newly recognized because somebody's died, or somebody's gotten sick, or there's been an impact on livestock or wildlife for that matter. Some of these viruses have had their origin is still not particularly understood. Many of them come from bat populations, where biodiversity is impacted by the way that humans are dealing with the habitats, and the bats have changed their behavior and are now in closer contact with humans and livestock. Some very interesting stories. If you've not heard of Marburg virus or some of the other coronaviruses, really interesting read to look a little bit further into this kind of world. Some emerging diseases are actually re-emerging. So diseases like polio, we thought we had that controlled. Well, do we? Measles, do we? So maybe it's because of a change in the ecology of the host or the pathogen, but it may be associated with human behavior too. I'm kind of thinking it does. I'm just going to go right through those. There's a lot more people than there used to be. And we are often in very close contact with each other. We live in urban centers. We don't just live in rural environments anymore. We have, when we do keep livestock, it's very often at really high densities. Have you ever driven through California and seen some of the dairy farms? Thousands of animals. They weren't meant to be that way. Poultry farms, thousands of animals in barns. Yes, they have good ventilation, but it's very easy for transmissible pathogens to go from one animal to another. And we'll get into avian influenza in a minute. All of those things do affect the environment around us. And all this time we're extracting natural resources, we're logging the Amazon, we're logging Central Asia, or at least not Central, maybe Southeast Asia. We're making a mess of this planet. Don't quote me on that, but we are. And every time you change a habitat, you change the organisms within it and their behavior. You run the risk of creating a wicked cycle that circulates pathogens that just never were meant to transmit to people before. So I'm not going to go into any further of this. I think you can all understand this, and evidently this is going to be recorded so you can ponder this on your own in the future. Oops. Where do these diseases come from? Some of the disease in wildlife come from spillovers from domestics. Just by the nature of livestock management, animals are kept at high density. They have been bred for thousands of years to be comfortable with each other, to be in high density, and for economic reasons, that's how we raise livestock, by and large, unless you've got some chickens in your backyard and a couple of goats. The large-scale farming is a fact that there's really not much we can do about it if you're a carnivore or an omnivore. We move animals, and I've talked about all of these things already, I think, but we also have to understand that pathogens do evolve as well. Just like people, just like animals, they change. And because their life cycle is much faster, it's very easy for them to evolve in ways that we can't predict. So for example, an influenza in a daycare center may not have much of a chance to evolve because there's only 20 kids in a daycare center. And if they pass an influenza virus from one to another, it's probably not going to evolve very much. It's probably not going to mutate. It's probably not going to recombine and become a different virus. But in a barn with 40,000 chickens, much more likely to do that. And the influenza virus is very, very prone to mutating. It's very good at that. So what goes into that barn is going to be probably a different virus than what comes out of that barn. So yes, pathogens do evolve. We've all heard about antibiotic-resistant bacteria. Same thing there. The more bacteria are exposed to a threat, a risk, the more, I don't think they have little brains that think about it, but the more likely they are to evolve into an antibiotic-resistant thing, because then it's going to survive. All that's, I'm just a poor old vet. I really don't know very much about this, but that makes common sense to me. Wildlife can be disease reservoirs, absolutely. We have domestic animal diseases that have spilled over into wildlife populations. One example could be bovine tuberculosis. Those of you old enough would probably remember that Wood Buffalo National Park has bison in it, and they are infected with bovine TB. Not all of them, but some of them are. The reason why is that the last plains bison were put into Wainwright, Alberta, into a preserve there with a bunch of infected cattle. Some of them crossbred, some of them got exposed to the TB, and then the greater wisdom of humans, we put those plains bison that were infected with TB and some cattle genes, and we put them in Wood Buffalo National Park. And then they infected the wood bison. Clever. Very difficult disease to control. Wildlife can also harbor diseases that can be transmitted to other wildlife, but also to humans. And it's said that 75% of emerging diseases are actually traced back to wildlife diseases. So that's something that really, I think, is something to take really seriously and to try to understand a little bit better. Lots of smarter people than me are dealing with that. Wildlife diseases are increasingly important for all these reasons. I won't, if someone wants an example, I guess I could give you a couple. There's a viral disease called PPR, which is Petit Plague, Anyway, it's a nasty hemorrhagic disease and almost has wiped out the saiga antelope in Central Asia. Fortunately, there are so many of them that they have recovered and they are building up their population again. But you'll have mass, Petit Plague ruminant, that's what it is, see. And there are efforts right now to eradicate that virus, but it's going to take a very, very long time to do that. Rinderpest is another virus in Africa that has caused huge mortality events. So for some species, conservation is a huge effort. Biodiversity, obviously, animals dying reduces biodiversity, and then we'll get back to human and animal health. The economic costs are huge. Parks Canada, I don't know how much they spent on controlling bovine tuberculosis in a park in Manitoba, Riding Mountain National Park. They had TB in the elk population there, overflowed into the deer population, overflowed back into the domestic cattle industry. It was recognized in the cattle industry, investigations led back to the park, and they now have eradicated it, or at least they think they have, which is, I think, probably the first time in the world that an agency has been able to eradicate bovine tuberculosis. So a big gain, but I don't even want to know what it cost. So basically, when we have a serious disease in wildlife, it's still raining. We consider it pretty much irreversible, because eradication, once it's established, is almost impossible. I'm going to give you a couple more examples. From domestics, we've seen feline and canine distemper really impact populations. Canine distemper actually is one of the big pathogens that affects African lions, amazingly enough. Distemper outbreaks in villages overflow into the lion population, probably because a lion ate a dog. And rabies, another one that is a very big issue. Probably the most common cause of rabies in humans is domestic dog bites from third world countries or countries, underdeveloped countries. Brucellosis is still an issue. That's a bacterial disease that causes abortion in cattle. It has overflowed into elk populations, bison populations. Ever been to Yellowstone? Jackson Hole, Wyoming, big feed grounds there for elk. They feed them all winter. And those elk are infected with a bacterial disease that causes them to abort. Huge density of animals. It's transmitted really, really fast in between them. Nipah virus, another bat-related virus that has overflowed into pigs in small farms in Southeast Asia, and then the pigs transmit it to people. Is it the Nipah? Anyway, there's so many different variations of this that you can get lost in them, as I'm doing right now. And again, I've talked about most of these. One interesting story, raccoon rabies used to be a very minor issue in the eastern part of the US and Canada. And then some hunters thought, wouldn't it be a great idea to have some more raccoons in, you know, New York area, New Jersey kind of thing, so we can hunt these raccoons. So they moved some raccoons from a facility in Georgia up north without knowing that they were infected with raccoon rabies. And that rabies epizootic is what we call it, has spread into New Brunswick, southern Quebec, and Ontario. So instead of only having red fox and bat rabies in Ontario, they now have raccoon rabies to deal with as well. So that's a kind of an interesting one. Chronic wasting disease. You heard about that? Well, we've really screwed around with that one, haven't we? We now have it in British Columbia even. And wasn't on my watch. We never had it when I was a vet, but oh well. It's a really serious problem. And it's going to cost a lot of money if we can do anything about it at all. Squirrel pox came from gray squirrels, translocated from Canada or the US into Italy and into the UK, and it has really decimated native squirrel populations there. So more diseases that are a problem. A lot of times we don't really know the cause of why wildlife disease outbreaks happen. Adenovirus hemorrhagic disease. I'm going to talk more about that. It's a disease of deer in North America, and it started on the Gulf Islands before I retired. We'll talk about that in a minute. There are a variety of diseases of amphibians. There's a ranavirus, there's some fungal diseases of amphibians that have really caused huge conservation issues, including eradication of certain animals and certain species. Cryptococcus, do you remember that? It's a fungus that was recognized in California. All of a sudden we started getting cases up here, including in porpoises, a variety. I found one in a case in a mink, and then we started getting people cases. Seemed to be focused on the east side of Vancouver Island and the Gulf Islands, a little bit on the mainland. And it's a fungal disease that causes a respiratory disease. Sometimes it migrates into the brain, etc. Really, really serious disease, very challenging to diagnose and challenging to treat. We've seen a lot of pet cases as well. And all of these things, including the Arctic parasites, we think have become a lot more common because of climate change. The climate changes, it may be more beneficial or more apt to support the pathogen and its evolution and its growth and its ability to be transmitted to another species. So it depends how specific you want to get. We've got lots of examples of changes in how wildlife health is affected by all these different factors, and human health. So a quick question, what do you know about zoonoses of wildlife, or what are the potential wildlife zoonoses in BC? Can you think of anything?
Rocky Mountain spotted fever.
Oh, yes.
Lyme disease?
Lyme disease, yeah.
I heard West Nile here.
West Nile, absolutely. Anything else? Oh, I'm going to show you a whole list of them. There's all these. So avian influenza, we all know about that one, don't we? The coronaviruses, West Nile, Hanta, rabies. Rabies, don't forget rabies. BSE, Is it a zoonosis? Well, it could be. It's caused by a prion, and that prion has been transmitted to people. A prion is a misfolded protein. It's not really considered an organism, but it is infectious. So that's mad cow disease, okay? It's got a whole story behind it that I won't talk about right now, but it has a relative, which is chronic wasting disease. That prion is considered a potential risk to people, but it's never been positively identified in a human yet. We worry about it. Giardia, beaver fever. Trichinella, we talked about that. What about Echinococcus granulosus and multilocularis? You ever heard of those? Those are tapeworms. Echinococcus granulosus is most commonly found in the guts of wolves and foxes, coyotes, and you could probably pick up that poop and not be affected by it. But if you ingested one of those eggs, it would form a larval form in your body, probably not very easily, but it could. Echinococcus multilocularis is a related tapeworm that is more commonly found in a specific group of foxes and coyotes that is now present in both in British Columbia and Alberta. There's been some really intensive studies done in Alberta in urban areas where there's lots of urban coyotes. That particular parasite, if it is ingested by a human, will cause not just one little larval form, but it'll usually go into the liver and cause almost like a cancerous growth of larvae. It's quite disgusting. And it can be fatal to the human. It's very hard to do anything surgically about it. And just giving somebody a wormer is not really going to help. We do have it in BC. But public health doesn't seem to be particularly interested in it. I talked about Cryptococcus, the fungus. And then we had a comment about Rocky Mountain spotted fever and Lyme disease. Both of those are bacteria-like organisms that are carried by ticks. So they're known as tick-borne diseases, and we'll talk a little bit more about those. Both of them are present in British Columbia, and there are other tick-borne organisms that are potentially found and have been found in BC, but not at really high rates. So I want to talk more about those and make sure I do. There's a family of bacteria that causes plague, and we have found plague in BC. E. coli, salmonella are both gut-associated bacteria that can cause issues if they are toxic strains. Leptospira, a bacteria associated with aquatic animals. You want to find Leptospira, go and sample some water in the middle of the Fraser Valley beside a dairy farm, you'll find it. Bovine TB, we don't have it in BC. I've never seen it, but it's something always in the back of your mind. And anthrax. Ever heard of that? Yeah. To my knowledge, it's very rare in BC. But there are more. There are more, you know, even the puppy roundworm can infect a human. So that's another zoonotic parasite, but we don't talk about it very much. Ringworm, a zoonotic organism. What else? Anyway, the list goes on. I just wanted you to look at this and realize that there is a lot of potential risk out there. Where's the risk? And how are these diseases transmitted? Many organisms are transmitted what's called directly, and that's just from me to you, you to me, or the pet to me, or the deer to me. And it may be through mouth, orally. That's a very common thing, fecal oral transmission, especially of enteric parasites. Enteric meaning gut associated. Things can be transmitted through breathing them in or breathing them in dust, the organism or the pathogen being attached to dust particles or something like that, and through cuts and bite wounds. Indirectly. The other form of transmission is through the pathogen being transmitted through an insect, through the environment, through water or food, right? Okay, that makes sense? Environmental contamination may be on equipment, so if you're working in a situation on a farm and you're using the same needle to vaccinate every animal, you're probably going to contaminate the needle, right? That's why we use new needles. That's what I mean by equipment. And what is the risk? Well, the effects of zoonotic diseases can really vary a lot. Most of the time, symptoms are unnoticed. I have some scars on the back of my cornea. And when my ophthalmologist diagnosed them, he said, "Oh, you got some little spots on the back of your cornea." And I said, "Yeah, and I bet you I know where that came from." And he said, "Yeah, it's probably toxoplasmosis." So that's a parasite of cats that, like, I can't think of how many cougars and tigers and things I've cut up in my career. Yes, tigers too. And somewhere along the way, I contaminated myself with Toxoplasma oocysts, and the parasite during its life cycle migrates through your body, tends to fixate on the nervous system or the eyes, and I've got some scars there. I think I'm okay. But yeah, so far so good. So that's a case of an unnoticed one. Or maybe it was mild, maybe I screwed up one day and didn't really realize why. Or they can be really severe. So think about that as a continuum. And the length of the illness, it may be acute is a term for something that happens very fast, and chronic is a long, long term. Probably a great example of a chronic disease is Lyme disease. That if you recognize it acutely, it can be treated, but if you cannot recognize it until it is further advanced in affecting your body, it may not be treatable, and then you got a nice chronic disease. And the diagnosis of these diseases may be very, very complicated as well. We don't have good diagnostic tests for everything. A lab report may not be accurate. Sometimes it is, sometimes it isn't, but there's got to be some interpretation done, and you may not have a clear positive or a negative. Okay. Really, I think your best bet is to be aware and communicate. Is this making sense? Is this flowing okay for all of you? Okay. Because I'm seeing some serious faces. Risks, yes?
Better at detecting and diagnosing Lyme disease?
The question is, are we getting better at testing and diagnosing Lyme disease? And I can't really answer that for you. I think we are. I think we do take it seriously. I'm going to give a little bit of a session on it in a minute, and I'll give you some facts. But, you know, one of the problems with Lyme disease specifically is that it's a very vague disease, and the symptoms really cover a lot of different things. You don't feel well. Your joints hurt. Your muscles are sore. Initially, well, let me talk about it when I've got that slide. So really, you know, if you're in an urban area, where's your exposure most likely to be? It's probably through your pets, but it could be through coyotes on the golf course, something like that, right? In a rural setting, maybe slightly different exposure rate. When you're working directly with livestock, again, you're probably more likely to be trampled or stick yourself with a needle than anything else. And then if you're indigenous, or you have indigenous or cultural norms where you're handling raw meat, raw fish, etc., a different exposure again. Maybe, have you ever eaten muktuk?
Yes.
Oh my God, that is the worst stuff ever. It's raw blubber, raw fermented blubber. It's not tasty. It's got the weirdest texture ever. And I told Peter and Lisa that I would eat anything in front of me, but I will never eat muktuk again. Are you at risk from eating raw fish, raw blubber? If there's a parasite in there or some kind of an organism, yeah, that puts you more at risk for sure. We had a case, though public health had a case, where an elderly Vietnamese man, a man of Vietnamese heritage, went hunting. He shot a young black bear. He served it very proudly to his family of 75 people. And they cooked it medium rare and ate it, and everybody got sick with trichinella. And it occurred to us that there was really no way to communicate to that culture very effectively because they didn't even speak English. So we created a little booklet, which I don't have with me tonight, but it has symbols for, you have this, you cook it really, really well. And using infographics instead of words sometimes is way more. You have to communicate the right way to people, put it that way. And what species are risky? All of these do have some degree of risk. So any animal potentially can. And frankly, you can also give diseases to them. All of these species are we've had foxes die of coronavirus transmitted from people, or indirectly from people. We've had grouse being affected by avian influenza and other organisms. I don't think sheep are really likely to be affected by very many diseases of people, but you never know. Can you see anything wrong with that sheep? I don't know if that works. This ewe's got a swelling right here. She's got a nice abscess here. And once that breaks, there's going to be pus everywhere. It'll be so much fun.
Is that one of your sheep?
No, it's not. So I have a former student that worked with me who's now the public health veterinarian for British Columbia, Erin Fraser. And I phoned her the other day and I said, tell me your top 3 zoonotic diseases in BC. She said, avian influenza, rabies, and enteric bacteria. Those are the top 3 of risk, as well as the likelihood of a severe reaction. So we've had people die of avian influenza in British Columbia. I think so far just 1 or 2. We have had 2 positive humans dying of rabies in 2003 and 2019. We have an increasing number of bats being diagnosed positive, but it's because there are more being submitted. It remains a low risk, but if it's not diagnosed soon enough and prophylactic medication is not given soon enough, then most likely we'll die of it. And your best bet to reduce risk is to vaccinate your pet. It's one disease that can be vaccinated against. Most of them you can't. So that's just, I want to keep that in the back of your mind. Enteric bacteria, this is poop. Whether it's your pet, whether it's bird poop on your feeder, whether it's your cat that eats the sick bird that had salmonella, and then you interact with your cat, change the litter box, or just have your cat drool on you, there's a risk there. So remember to keep things as clean as possible. And we'll get more into what you can actually do later, but just remember that this is a significant risk. It's much more likely to be from a species at high density where there's lots of poop around, etc., rather than the deer that wanders through your yard and poops a little bit on the lawn, or the puppy has diarrhea in the woods. Again, just think about how you are at risk from something like a poop-associated bacteria. But it does happen all the time. So you tell me, what's your perspective? What would you say is there something else that for you, you're not a public health veterinarian, is there something for you that you worry about when you think about wildlife or pets and disease?
Oh, what about hantavirus?
I had two. I'm going with Lisa first because she made me dinner. She commented, what about hantavirus? Well, hantavirus for a while during my career was a huge thing. We have had fatalities in British Columbia, and certainly we've had them other places. When we first heard about it being a risk, we looked at, well, the host for hantavirus is the white-footed deer mouse, Paramiscus species, and they are present all over Canada. And basically, I'm sure we've all had them in our houses because this time of year, they're chilly and they want to get in. A certain percentage of them carry hantavirus. Not all of them, and in some cases, very few of them in a population carry them. We can't really tell from the mouse running around whether it's a carrier or not. The hantavirus is excreted in the feces as well as the urine, probably more in urine, and contaminates the environment. Humans get it from breathing it in, and it's usually dust that is associated with urine staining or feces. So how would you be exposed to it? You're sweeping up an old building, the dust becomes aerosolized and you breathe it in and you happen to be very sensitive to it. That's when you would get it. The case that I was most familiar with was a biologist that was working in the Chilcotin and was staying in a cabin that was terribly mouse infested and sleeping on the floor. She died, and nobody really understood how to treat hantavirus, the whole respiratory syndrome. We should ask Peter about that. They now know how to treat it much better, and they can act on it very quickly. I think there was another fatality on Salt Spring at some point, and that fellow was exposed maybe on the West Coast in a cabin, something like that. It's very easy to avoid it. If you're in an environment that is contaminated with mouse droppings, or the urine will be there as well, spray it with a dilute bleach solution or a Lysol solution so that it's not aerosolized. Wear a mask, clean it up, wear gloves, get rid of it. So when you understand how the disease is transmitted, you can take steps to avoid it much better. Honestly, Lisa, I don't think I've heard of another hantavirus case since then. And I can't remember the year. I think the Salt Spring case was the last one.
Just one little question on that. So if you are exposed to the hantavirus, does that mean you're going to get sick? Or do some people get sick and some people don't?
I was at, the question was, if you're exposed to hantavirus, do some people get sick and some people not? Probably. I was at a meeting once where there was a lot of small mammal biologists, and we all gave samples, blood samples, to a researcher, and he looked at everybody's antibody levels to hantavirus, and nobody had any. And these were people that were handling small rodents all the time. So I don't think it's all that common, and I think it's just hard luck and poor hygiene when you do get it. But there may be people that are just really, really sensitive to it as well. Was there another question?
It was tick-borne disease from here, right? You know?
Yeah, well, you said what other diseases could be around.
Yeah.
We have ticks here.
There's ticks everywhere. And I want to have I've got a special session on ticks for you, I promise. That's enough of class participation. We're cutting you off now. So I'm going to, obviously, Lyme disease is caused by a bacteria called Borrelia burgdorferi, and the disease is called borreliosis as well as Lyme disease. So yes, it is present, and we're going to talk about that in a bit. Other tick-borne diseases are of concern. And the Rocky Mountain spotted fever is not particularly common, but it's becoming more common as tick numbers increase and climates are more beneficial to ticks or more benevolent to ticks. These other two words, Babesia and Anaplasma, these are two bacteria-like organisms as well that can be transmitted by ticks, and we know that they are present, at least on southern Vancouver Island and on some of the Gulf Island. At least they're present in the ticks. I'm not aware of any humans that have picked up those two diseases from ticks, but I do know we did diagnose a couple of dogs on southern Vancouver Island with them. And I don't have any specific numbers right now, but I do have some records. I'll show you exactly where those were taken. So let's just keep our minds open, and if you've got more questions, please suggest any other things I can talk about, but let's carry on. How are we doing for time? Oh, good. So, little did I know that the Lyme disease slide is right here. This is what Borrelia burgdorferi looks like. It's just kind of a little wavy bacteria. It's kind of cute. In BC, the most common vector is a soft tick called Ixodes pacificus. It's not a very good vector. It's not very efficient at transmitting this organism. It's nothing like the tick that's found in eastern Canada and the US. So our pacificus tick it's an okay vector, but it's not very good at it. So that's one of the reasons why we don't see Lyme disease in British Columbia at the rate that we do in Ontario and Quebec. So we're lucky that way. It's very small. So ticks have a life cycle, right? The bottom is an adult, and then you have a nymph, and then a larva, and then a little tiny guy, and I can't remember what that's called. It'll come to me. But they're not very big. And because this particular species of tick has a 3-host cycle, it takes a while for it to mature into an adult where you can really see it very well. And it has, these hosts are not just all human. In fact, humans are not really part of the life cycle. They're just sort of accidental hosts. So we'll get into this a little bit more as I babble on. In most cases, mice are part of the life cycle. Birds can be part of the life cycle. And in southern Vancouver Island and on the Gulf Islands, lizards are a big part of the cycle too. Deer are, birds. Where's my lizard picture? I've got a lizard picture coming up. In humans, when you're bitten by a tick that regurgitates this bacteria into your bloodstream, you get what's called a bullseye rash, right? And that is probably one of the most diagnostic things, at least when you look at a case description of Lyme disease in humans, that's what you're looking for. So if you see that on your skin or on your grandkid's back end, that's when you go to the doctor. And that's when you really should be treated with a tetracycline antibiotic, because taking a blood sample at that stage of the game is really not going to tell you very much. Taking the tick off and sending that tick away to the lab is a really good way to diagnose it. But a lot of people are creeped out by ticks and probably don't want to do that. But it's a really good idea to do that. So if you see something like that and there's a tick attached, pull the tick off, put it in a little pill vial, and look up, and I'll show you where you can send it. But they're interested in tracking that kind of information for sure. But do take it seriously. So it's a really good idea to do a full body check every day if you're out there. How else do you get rid of ticks? You can wear clothing that doesn't allow the ticks to crawl up onto your legs, so you can put socks over your pants and all that sort of thing. You can wear DEET. You can wear clothing that's impregnated with DEET, etc. And basically, for me, I don't like doing that. I would prefer just to check myself. If a tick attaches to you, it takes about 12 hours for it to feed and regurgitate the bacteria into you. So if you check on a regular basis, you're probably not going to get infected with Lyme disease or the bacteria. Here's my lizard picture. So that's an engorged tick on the neck of the lizard. So the life cycle is actually a 3-year life cycle. The eggs hatch, turn into a larva, usually feed on whatever's around, maybe a lizard, maybe a bird, etc. And then they molt into a nymph, which usually feeds on something a little bit larger, and look at all those options. And then the nymph molts into an adult form, and that adult form lays eggs. So it's a fairly complicated life cycle, but the more hosts that are out there, the more likely that cycle is going to happen.
Is that the same kind of tick we find on moose in the north?
No, that's a dermacentor.
Oh, what was that?
Silly Allison. I'm going to show you a picture of both in a minute. So what's being done about Lyme disease? Again, this is from my friend Erin. She said, we've written a report on Lyme disease in humans and tick surveillance in BC. It's on the website, and it's a 2025 update. And directly out of that report, the number of locally acquired Lyme disease cases and the prevalence of Borrelia in submitted ticks remains low in BC. 17 cases were confirmed last year, with only 3 believed to be locally acquired. And 0.1% of these Ixodes ticks were positive for Borrelia. So that's pretty low. But is it a serious disease? Yeah, of course it is. So take it seriously, but don't panic about it. I think that would be my take-home message. Anybody here ever had an experience with it? Oh.
Not person, grandkid
Grandkids?
from Ontario.
Yeah? Really bad? Yeah, yeah. Okay.
Last summer got diagnosed here, so it might show up in numbers here.
Yeah, but again, it's very rare to have the scapularis tick here.
Okay.
It's much more common in Eastern Canada and Eastern states.
Yeah.
So while your risk is low, because of the consequences of this disease, prevent the ticks from getting on you, and when you have a bite, get that tick off you as fast as possible, and go ahead and get it submitted. So, I'm not dancing for you, I'm sorry. So what do we do for tick surveillance? There are locally funded and supported tick surveillance programs. But what's evolved in the last few years is a national program called eTick, which is basically a passive way of identifying ticks around the country. And what you do is you go online, you take a picture of the tick you want identified, and this platform will identify it for you and feed back within a day. They have specialists that identify them for you just from a photograph. They're not really that hard to identify to at least a species. The genus could be a little bit more complicated, but this is a really, really good tool to use. And it's just online. It's called eTick. I like this. eTick, free, easy, and fun. But if you look at how it's been going on since 2017, and they've done over 36,000 identifications. So it's pretty good. And what it does is it provides data for these public health folks to be able to inform people about risk. And I think that's a pretty good way to support us. They give you step-by-step instructions on how to take the picture, how to submit it, and it's really quite an easy tool to use, even if you're not very techy. Ixodes pacificus, which the common name is western black-legged tick. This is the one that's really tiny. You can see that little arrow points, and that's a thumbnail there. When it's in its nymph form, or larval form, I'm sorry, it's really tiny. Dermacenter there are a variety of species. The one that's on moose, which is often called the moose tick, is Dermacenter andersoni, or There's a bunch of different ones. This particular one is a dermacenter, and it is found in the Rockies, not on the coast very much at all, unless some bird drops one off. But this is the one that causes Rocky Mountain spotted fever. And it's, you know, if you're on a road trip through the Kootenays, could your dog pick it up there? Absolutely. It's a good reason to keep your dog on some kind of a prophylactic medication. Your dog could bring it back, you could get bitten, blah, blah, blah. So the way we travel, even though this tick is not really considered native to this area, you might pick up something like that. So that's one of the reasons why it's good to have the identification tools.
Do they use the same antibiotic for Rocky Mountain?
I think they do. I think they do. Yeah, I've never had to deal with it, so I don't know a lot about it. Do you know, Peter? Yeah. Yeah, probably. So this is just a map of Western Canada. The blue is the dermacenter, the Rocky Mountain spotted tick, whatever, fever tick. And then the darker gray is Ixodes pacificus range. So you can see that even though this massive blue stain is threatening us, the only way it's going to really get over here is mostly accidental. The density is over here, not over here. But I'm going to just sit for a minute. I've got a couple of notes here from that I've got that the rickettsial disease. Rickettsia is like a tiny, tiny little bacteria as a blood-borne parasite. And it has a lot of relatives, the Babesia, the Anaplasma. There's also a Colorado tick fever. Most of those are not really considered huge human threats. They'd be very unusual for you to see in this area, but they are potentially probably more of a concern for your dog than for yourself. Again, if there is an unknown fever that you've been bitten by a tick, I think it would be a really good opportunity to go to your MD and say, I've been bitten by a tick, I got a fever, I'm a little bit worried, we were in the Kootenays or we were in southern Saskatchewan, could I have some kind of an infectious disease? It's a good idea to check, rather than just shuffling it off. Back to Lyme disease again, and I just want to emphasize to you that this was a 2023 map of cases. The darker the color, the more cases. So in Nova Scotia, there were over 2,000 cases. Ontario, almost 1,900. Quebec, 652. These are cases of diagnosed Lyme disease. In BC, there's 28. So we really are very fortunate. And even though there is a huge impact on the individual, the risk is not very high here. Believe me or not. Couple of slides, or one slide of sampling sites for ticks. These are ticks that have been turned in and recognized, and 1 and 2 in the Victoria area were diagnosed with Lyme disease, and 2 with Anaplasma, a Babesia on Salt Spring, 1 up in Parksville, and 1 North Vancouver. Both of those ones were probably related to mouse exposure. This Babesia, there are 4 cases on the Salt Spring, at least it looks like on Salt Spring. Ticks were collected with this Babesia, probably associated with deer. I'm thinking because it's got an otocolii, and then these guys. We don't really understand. Public health doesn't go out and do a lot of research on these organisms. They just find them and they go, oh, that's interesting. They may have been associated with a case, and I don't have that information, but The BC sampling of ticks, these are sites where someone has gone out and collected ticks and then just done a survey of what they contain. So that's not necessarily cases. I think that's right, because these maps I got from a researcher, so. Whoa. You guys are interested in stories about deer. I know you are. And I know hyperabundant deer on Gulf Islands have been an issue for a long time. I've been involved in Sydney Island and fallow deer since the 80s. And while you don't have fallow deer, I understand, you do have black-tailed deer, and you have a lot of them. Management of black-tailed deer is the provinces, right? And it's really not that hard to do on public land. But you're on an island with a heck of a lot of private land. And many people are from, you know, how many of you were born on Pender Island? How many of you were born in a hunting family? Yeah, Dave. So it's challenging to manage deer in a situation like this, especially when you don't know how many deer you have. You know you have a lot. Yep. So we've always had challenges in BC, especially in urban areas or situations like the islands, where we really, I'm saying we, I don't work for government anymore. I don't have to say that. But it is very, very challenging. And after working for the government for 30 years, it's hard not to say we, because you can't keep everybody happy and you can't do magical things with animals. So I'm going to talk a little bit about some of the diseases I see in black-tailed deer. And I want to tell you that if you have more hosts, you have more ability to transmit diseases. As we've talked about, the higher the density, the more likely you are to transmit things. You got more deer, you got more ticks, you got more Lyme disease, maybe, or maybe not. We don't know if we don't look. But I want to just go through this. So honestly, the warning is that there's going to be some gross pictures, but I'm going to try to make them as interesting as I can. So hyperabundant deer, concern for deer health and human health. When a pathogen is present, the higher host density, I've got a cramp in my leg, I'm sorry. Obviously, the more animals, the more likely you are to have things transmitted. And it doesn't really matter how it's transmitted. But a lot of it's through environmental contamination, whether it's a water source or a ground that you're using to grow food out of. All of those things can make a difference. I want to talk about adenovirus hemorrhagic disease because I really was excited about this when I found it. My friend Henry Lang, have you ever heard of Henry? He's a vet on Main Island. He's kind of retired now. But Henry has a very special place in my heart. Not just because he's a vet, but he's a really good man. And I was called by a medical personnel on Galliano Island who said, we've got deer dropping dead. This was a few years ago. And she had a brain, she had medical training, and she was really highly concerned. She said, it was like September. No, it was August. And deer don't die in August. And she said, they're in really good shape. They're just dropping down dead and they got foam at their mouth. And I was like, oh, that's weird. And I said, we need to do some postmortems. And I phoned Henry. Henry took his little boat and went over to Galliano and cut up a deer for me. And I saw the picture and I said, this is adenovirus. And we sent tissues to the lab and I said, I want you to look for adenovirus. We don't have that in BC, Helen. And I said, I want you to send the slides to Leslie in California because it's adenovirus. I know it is. And it was. Well, the deer were at high density. This virus, we don't know very much about it. It shows up in California in the 70s, killed a whole bunch of deer. Never came back in that area again. Showed up somewhere else in Oregon. Just out of the blue, killed a bunch of deer, didn't show up again. We now have it pretty much all the time. on southern Vancouver Island, and I don't know about the Gulf Islands, but we got a really interesting virus that nobody really knows how it's transmitted. But it's not zoonotic. But I really get excited about it, so I'm going to show you anyway. The index case, that's a term for the first case. And it was on Galiano Island in 2020. And this is Henry's picture. I love Henry. So we got some abnormalities here. And I'm gonna orientate you. The head's over there. Bum's over here. This is the lung. That yellow arrow is pointing to a very edematous lung. It's got a lot of fluid in it. This arrow is pointing to the chest full of blood. And this arrow is pointing to very, very red intestinal tract. And there's a fly. And that's about it. A close-up of the intestinal tract, would you agree that's full of blood? Probably, eh? Yeah. And a little bit closer up of the lung. A lung should be nice and pink, but it shouldn't have all these roads on it. Those roads are little walls that are full of fluid instead of tissue. So instead of air being in there, it's all full of fluid, and that's why the foam comes out the mouth, because they're basically drowning in their own fluid. And then blood. Sorry. I do get excited about this. That particular epizootic has had a pretty significant effect on deer on Vancouver Island and the Gulf Islands, and I'm amazed that you still have hyperabundant deer here. They've obviously recovered really well. Did you see a decline in deer after 2020?
Yeah, it was a big decline.
Yeah.
And the deer before that were actually getting mangy.
Yeah.
And the deer we have now are looking really healthy.
I want to come back to that about the mange, because I've seen the same thing in my neighborhood, that we just don't see that hair loss anymore. The adenovirus hemorrhagic disease was on Whidbey Island, some of the San Juan Islands. I don't think it jumped to the mainland, but it might have. It's hard when you leave a job and you don't have all that information anymore. But it's been a really significant, has played a really significant role on reducing deer populations on Vancouver Island for sure. And I wish I knew, but nobody seems to be interested in doing the research. But darn, it was exciting. We had everyone tracking it and giving us new cases, and it was kind of exciting. But oh well. Nope. Adenoviruses are really pretty species specific, and as far as we know, it only hit the deer. Yeah, I've never seen an elk with it, anything like that either. Yep.
2 years in a row, I had one doe that had 2 fawns in consecutive years. She carried some sort of pathogen or whatever, and it went to the 2 fawns and killed each fawn in the following, those 2 years. Never did find out, and I phoned the wildlife place on Salt Spring, and they said, couldn't treat it. When the doe dies, that will be the end of it. And that's what happened. She actually died, and that would be her fawns died.
Do you know, I think what's happened is that that certain animals are carrying that virus and passing it on to their kids.
And you could see it in the back legs of sort of black, or whatever you call runny black.
Oh, that's diarrhea.
No, this was on the skin.
Oh, okay.
Not diarrhea.
Okay,
It was
okay.
something on the skin that kept showing up.
Did you do a postmortem for me?
Anyway, don't worry. But I just felt sorry when the fawns were like 2 weeks old, and you'd seen them almost born, and then they died.
Yeah. Well, it's what happens. And there is really no way to treat anything. No, not when it's wild like that.
Okay.
So what are some of the other diseases that deer have? I'm going to go through a few of these as well. Again, I'm going to warn you, it's not pretty. Actually, sometimes what I do is I make this a test. So if I'm challenging you, you're not going to be marked on it. So close contact with deer, between deer and people. It may be just the environment that you share, but it also may be that you're a hunter. And honestly, hunting community was really in severe decline until about 15 years ago when people started encouraging people to hunt a little bit more. Now women hunt a lot more than they used to. Children hunt. People hunt because they want a natural resource to eat, a healthy meat to eat. If it's part of your culture, it's much easier to accept. But there are still a lot of people that don't hunt and don't understand that culture. If you're one of those, or you don't like eating meat, that's your choice to make. But I'm gonna gear this a little bit more to hunters and people who are outdoors and encountering animals that are sick or dying, or just have strange abnormalities. Back to this guy again. Does he look healthy? Yeah. He's got a little fly on his nose. This animal looks healthy to me. He's alert. He's looks like he's in good body condition. He's not exactly running away, but that's because the photographer was clever. But that looks, when you're hunting, you're looking for a healthy animal, right? This is a picture from Saskatchewan, and it's a hunted animal that's, actually I have no idea where it came from. It's a very old picture, but it's obviously in the back of a pickup truck. And somebody probably pulled it off the road or something and brought it to us. It was when I was doing my pathology degree, and I had to take a picture of it because it was really horrible. So describing this, it's an older buck with a lot of skin lumps, right? And some of those lumps look infected to me. This is not an ear. This is not an ear. This is not a deer I would want to eat, just simply because aesthetically it's not looking all that great and there's an active infection going on. Would you hunt this animal? No, why would you shoot an animal like that that's obviously not doing that well? We often see bucks that are fighting and are older, and this is an older buck by the look of his antlers because they're starting to become what we call senile. They're not beautiful big antlers, they're just sort of regressing. He probably was getting beat up by others, and these growths are caused by a virus, a papillomavirus. And normally the animal self-clears them. It's just kind of like a wart. Usually after 6 weeks or so they regress and the animal heals. When they get this severe, there's probably something else going on with this animal. He's not particularly healthy. Bucks in rut are usually really, really stressed. They don't eat well, so it kind of makes sense. But it's not an animal you're going to hunt anyway. What about, these are the same or similar masses of the skin, and you'll see one on this doe that may be just a traumatic event, that she was hit by a car and has a big blood blister there, or hematoma. But this one and this one are both skin lumps that may be caused by a papillomavirus, or it could be just another type of virus causing a skin lesion. All of those animals look pretty healthy to me. Maybe the left one not so great, but that really would have no impact on those animals being harvested or being considered unhealthy. So would I eat any of those ones? Sure. These are lungs. They are caribou lungs. And while the color is a little bit off, that's just because they've been hauled out of the animal. You can tell the animal's in good shape because there's lots of fat. But you can see some sort of scarred areas that are kind of round and raised. And the circle is around a couple of them that are actually fluid filled. These are cysts of a tapeworm, the Echinococcus granulosus, that in an ungulate, the larva forms these big fluid-filled pockets with larvae inside them. This is pretty severe. You don't usually see this many. Would you eat this one? Sure, you could eat that lung. Wouldn't hurt you at all. But do you want to? Not. It's very common to see wild ungulates with parasitic lesions. You just remove those. Do not feed them to your dog. Because if your dog eats that fluid-filled lump, that larvae is going to hatch in its intestine and create an adult tapeworm, and then that adult tapeworm's eggs are infectious to humans. So you got to understand your life cycle, but nobody wants to eat that anyway, I don't think.
A little extra protein, maybe?
Well, if you cook it, it would be better.
Yeah.
I know a lot of people are interested in using lungs for their dogs, drying them and using them as treats, but this is something that if you're going to use it for your dog, you got to cook it first and kill the parasite. Here's a young buck. Can you tell me what its body condition is? Good, bad, thin, fat? Yeah, it's fat. See the fat under the fingers? But can you see something wrong? So on the inside of the rib cage, this should be nice and clean and shiny. And there's some little white areas here that if you really stretch your imagination, you can sort of imagine are kind of pussy. That's not good. There's an infection there. And in fact, this buck had a puncture in its chest, probably from another buck fighting with it and puncturing its chest with an antler. So would you eat this one? I wouldn't recommend it because obviously the bacteria that caused the pus that you can see a lot better in here, you see a big pussy mass here, that would be in the bloodstream and it's probably not a good idea for you to eat it. It also looks like something else that I'm going to get into right now. Okay, there we go. But it's a little different. Can you see the difference between that picture before and this picture? These are two pictures of a deer with bovine tuberculosis. Again, the rib cage is pulled back. This is the liver, this is the diaphragm, and that's the lung. And you can see multiple white lumps, and they're gritty and they're hard. It almost looks like somebody was eating cottage cheese and sneezed, because it's everywhere, right? And here, same thing. The top of the lungs have all these little tiny gritty things. That's what bovine tuberculosis looks like in a deer. And if you ever see anything like that, you want to make sure you talk to somebody, report it, because that's a really serious thing. Every year when I was working as the vet for the province, I'd have a hunter say, "Oh God, I found bovine TB." And you'd get a picture, and then you'd try to get a sample, and usually they just left it in the bush. But I've never seen anything like this in BC. We've had bovine TB in a couple of cattle herds, and we've gone out and sampled deer, and we've never found it in the deer population. We've gotten lucky.
Is that what TB looks like in humans?
Sorry?
Would TB in humans look like that?
No. There's something about the deer immune system that it almost always looks like this in deer, but not so much in elk or bison. Usually it's fewer. These are called tubercles, and they're usually smaller and maybe larger. Peter, would you agree with that? Have you ever seen it?
Yeah, and a rare form of human TB is called miliary tuberculosis.
Yes.
And you have multiple small
Yeah.
lesions throughout the lung.
Yeah.
It's rare.
Yeah.
Usually a single big one.
Whew, got that right. This probably looks familiar. And this is typically what we call hair loss syndrome in deer. black-tailed deer. It's rarely seen anywhere else in British Columbia, but is very common, or used to be really common, on southern Vancouver Island and the Gulf Islands. You also will see them on San Juan Island and Whidbey and some of the Puget Sound Islands. So why? The hair is lost because they're chewing and scratching at themselves. So the hair is lost because of that, and the reason why is these. These are an exotic louse that was brought here by British settlers when they brought in fallow deer. And they spread to the black-tailed deer population, and when you have high density of animals and a lot of juveniles, the juveniles are less likely to be able to be cleared, and these lice are transmitted animal to animals, just like head lice in kids. You got a daycare center, you're going to have lice on everybody, and same thing with the deer. When we reduced the density of deer with AHD, we reduced the density of lice. I think. I didn't do an experiment, but I kind of think we did. But there's literally millions of them on these animals, and I can't. Have you ever had lice on you? I remember once I was called out to look at a sick cow, and I didn't have my stethoscope, so I put my head on her rumen to listen to her rumen, and then I got back in the truck after treating her, and it's like, ran into the clinic, got some flea shampoo, and hosed my head down. But it's such a creepy, crawly feeling, so it must drive them nuts. No wonder they chew themselves apart. And then once they don't have any hair, they're really susceptible to exposure. On a day like this, you don't have hair, the wind, the rain is going to cause hypothermia, or at least a real huge energy drain, and that's why we see fawns dying and having diarrhea and not doing very well. So you're not doing animals a favor by having them at high density. With AHD, with lice, not great. Neither one of those are zoonotic diseases. Because the lice like this will sit on you for a while and play around, but they're not interested in humans. This is a really great deer picture I got from a hunter. And it was a young mule deer buck that had almost all the hair on his face just scabbed up, and hair loss on his lower legs. I only got the pictures. I never got any samples. He either had ringworm or he had a really bad skin infection, but they found him on a ranch in the Chilcotin hanging out with the young calves, which all had ringworm as well. So I think it was probably a ringworm case. And you know what ringworm is? It's a fungus, right? And it's present in the soil, super common in young calves at high density. So you get a buck hanging around eating the feed, he's going to get it too, just from contact with everybody else. If he wasn't in bad condition, he probably would have healed eventually, but who knows? He didn't have a chance. Ever seen this in your deer meat? Little tiny white lumps?
Trichinella?
Nope. Nope. Trichinella you can only see microscopically. This is a different type of tapeworm where the larval form insists in the muscle tissue, and it basically disappears when you cook it. So most people, unless it's a really heavily infected animal, don't even notice it. You can get tapeworm like this in organic cattle and sheep and goats too. It's not that uncommon, especially if you don't worm your dogs. So it's something to be aware of, but you're not going to eat this if you see something this badly infected anyway, right? Not Lisa anyway. Oh, Dave, cook it.
I always made sure I took them out before.
Yeah. There are diseases that are just not obvious. This is a classic. One of these animals is not what it should be. Which animal would you say looks better than the other one?
The right.
Yeah, the right one is nice and round. He's got a great look in his face. He's got beautiful velvet antlers that are well grown. He's nice and round. The guy on the left is scruffy looking. His antlers aren't grown out. He's got a silly radio collar on him, but never mind. Just look at the look in his eye. And that's an animal infected with chronic wasting disease at an early stage. I can't say that the one on the right does not have chronic wasting disease, because the only way to diagnose it is to take a sample of the brain. Well, sorry, not quite true. In a deer, you can take a sample of lymph node in here, and you'll get a diagnosis. But this deer is definitely showing symptoms. This one is not at this stage of the game. My old friend AHD, you can't diagnose it when an animal's initially infected with it. It'll take maybe 5 to 7 days for the virus to kill the animal. And there are other viruses like that. There are other chronic diseases like toxic salmonella, toxic E. coli that take a while to have an effect on the animal. And this animal might simply be a carrier like typhoid Mary was. Do you recognize that term? Yeah, good. And then all these parasites that I've shown, until you kill the animal and open it up, you really can't diagnose it. So you have to assume that an animal has the potential to transmit something to you, even if you can't see anything wrong with it. Now, I don't want you all to be afraid, but you need to be able to use some common sense. There are risks everywhere in life. Look at me lecturing you guys about risks in life, right? But there is. And, you know, it can happen to anyone. This is my finger. I was working on a herd of bighorn sheep in radium, and I was taking tonsil samples and swabbing their noses and doing all kinds of other things, and I ran out of gloves. So I went ahead and did it anyway, and I got a virus from these bighorns. It's a pox virus that causes a really ugly lesion on your skin, but it's where my finger scraped against their teeth, and I had an open sore, and I got a virus. I went to a dermatologist who said, well, good thing I looked in the literature, because 50% of the papers say it's transmissible from you to your husband, and 50% of the papers say it's not. So it's like, okay, I'll wear a glove for a month. And he never got it, and that my finger's better now. But it can happen. So what do you do about this? Again, common sense. Separate the risk from yourself. But the risk really depends on what the pathogen is and what the disease caused by the pathogen is. Whenever you're handling live animals or dead animals, use some PP. Personal protective, PPD, PE, right, PPE. Wear a mask if you're handling things really closely. Wear gloves. It's just common sense. So if you're pulling a deer off the road that got hit by a car and you're taking it home, wear some gloves. It's just.
Reading my mind.
Yep.
I have a neighbor that's always hauling these deer home off the road and wanting to disperse it to her neighbors, and I'm just like, no, thank you.
You know what? It's a great thing to do, but even hunters rarely wear gloves when they're dressing their meat, and I think it's just a great practice. Yep.
Question for you. If you see a buck that is weaving around and can no longer go over fences and stuff, like my cousin had a deer last fall with that, can you notify the police or whatever to have it put down, or does it have to live out its week or two in
Well, honestly, Mother Nature is not very kind, and if something gets hit by a car and has a brain injury.
This one was way out in the field. And
okay.
Eventually, my cousin dragged it to a hole that he dug and threw soil on top of it.
Was it alive or dead?
It was a big job. Because this deer,
I don't know what the process here on Pender Island is, whether RCMP will assist you with that, but it really depends on them. I know the conservation officers will not come and help you with that. Your road maintenance people might assist you, or you find some big, burly, nice guy and ask him to help.
well, I know my cousin at 6'2", it was a big job.
Yeah, yeah, it is. Yeah, it is. Yeah,
He threw
yeah.
dirt on top of it, and he said, I don't know if it's all covered, but at least, you know, don't go in there.
You know, carcasses can be consumed by scavengers too. You've got vultures and eagles, and so
This was a time of year when the vultures had gone
yeah,
conveniently.
darn them anyway. Practice good hygiene. Wear gloves, wash hands, and any equipment that you use. When you're preparing food, keep yourself clean. Handle and cook the food properly. If you're not sure whether if your neighbor is salvaging meat, make sure they cook it properly. Or at least if you're getting it, if it doesn't look good and smell good, don't eat it, right?
I do think they said that if the deer was injured by a car accident, the police would come out and finish it.
Will they? Yeah. Unfortunately, a lot of RCMP officers are not taught how to shoot things very well when they're deer. They might know how to shoot people, but encourage them to shoot them in the head carefully. If you're spending a lot of your time outdoors, and I really hope you do, because that is the most beneficial thing for your health, just be aware of ticks. Wear appropriate clothing, remove ticks as soon as you can, hold on to them. The e-tick website will give you instructions on how to hold a tick. Usually I put it in a little pill vial with a little bit of damp paper towel and then put in the fridge, and if you do not feel well, you could submit that to the lab. The lab that identifies or looks at what a tick contains is present at the BC Centre for Disease Control, and all of that should be on the website. And if I can, are you really bored already, Dan? Okay, good. I could actually provide some of that information to you. I don't have it with me, but I think really being aware and communicating, learning about the risks, tell your medical staff of what your personal risk is. I hauled a deer off the road and I carved it up and gave it to my 3 neighbors, and now everybody's sick. That would be helpful for them. And report any signs of illness or behavior, something unusual, if your pets are acting strangely, or your neighbors, or the wildlife. I mind meld with my patients on a regular basis. I was just in Saskatchewan working on a bighorn sheep breeding farm a couple of weeks ago, and I'm taking a blood sample from this ewe. This is a bighorn ewe in a cattle squeeze, and she just rested her head on top of mine, and honestly, I've never had that kind of an experience from a wild animal before, because they're usually drugged, terrified, or dead. And she was just like looking at my head as a convenient support system, which I loved it. It was great. Anyway, I'm not sure if this is what you expected, and I hope that you learned at least something. And if there's any further questions, I'm here. Thank you so much for inviting me.
Questions? Maybe people could stay around if anybody has to do, they can, but I'm sure there's questions.
I'm just curious about those pyron diseases and how host-specific they are. Like, I'm really surprised that chronic wasting disease hasn't been found in, like, it's not as big of a problem as it could be, knowing how pyrons can act, right? Prions, yeah.
So there's a long story behind chronic wasting disease. And it was first recognized in 2 institutions in Colorado and Wyoming that were research facilities where they kept deer and elk at fairly high densities because of the research that they were doing. And they recognized that some of those animals just got skinny and died, despite everything that they did. And it seemed to be pen related. Some of those animals were sold to game farms in the US, and some of those animals escaped or were in contact with animals across fences. And before they really diagnosed what was causing this chronic wasting disease, they thought it was mineral problems, they thought it was genetic, they thought it was all kinds of things. And then they recognized that the brains had a whole bunch of little holes in them, which is the term, and the term for that is a spongiform encephalopathy. So they recognized that it was something like that, but before they recognized that, it had moved into the game farm industry and into the wild. So that's where it all started. Unfortunately, with that delay in diagnosing it, animals were moved across the US and moved into Canada in the mid-90s. Saskatchewan and Alberta opened up the game farm industry for elk especially, but also for white-tailed deer. And they brought the disease in at some point in the early 90s from probably North or South Dakota, where game farms were marketing elk up there. And before you know it, the game farm industry had enough animals infected and moved around without really any documentation that their whole bunch of farms were infected. The industry didn't have very good regulations for fencing, so animals went back and forth along the fence, and all of a sudden the wildlife was affected as well. If you look at a map, there's a map with the US Geological Service that tracks the dates of and how the distribution of chronic wasting disease has progressed. And it's shocking, but it's all predictable. Once it got into the wild, there was no controlling it. Alberta at one point had a massive cull that the papers got hold of, media hated it, they shut it down, and it continues to march across towards the west. Meanwhile, Montana had a really high urban deer population south of the border. They didn't recognize they had chronic wasting disease in it, and it's come up from there into BC. So why is it there? Those facilities in Colorado and Wyoming at one point were domestic sheep research facilities, and domestic sheep have a prion disease called scrapie, which is the diagnosis, the clinical signs are they get thin and they get really itchy, which is why it's called scrapie, because they rub on fences and stuff. And they think that the number of of sheep with scrapie at those facilities was so high that the environment was so contaminated that it crossed species barriers and got into the elk and the deer. But they don't know. There's no way to go back in time and figure that out, and genetically they can't really work it out. So that's one of the theories anyway. BC has a very different landscape than Alberta, Saskatchewan, Colorado, all those other ones. And one thing we do have is a lot of predators. Predators will kill animals that start showing signs of chronic wasting disease, so may reduce the transmission rate and the number of animals that are really heavily infected. So it may behave differently in British Columbia. But the way we approached it, or the way I approached it when I was working for government, was to educate people and prevent entry. But you can't control animals walking across the border. You can educate hunters, and you can ask people not to bring certain organs and parts of animals that are potentially infected into the province and leave them in the landfill, or leave them on the landscape that would contaminate the environment. But you know, sometimes that's even impossible because people don't read or follow instructions very well. So it's a really challenging disease to work with, and you know, chances are we're going to have it further in the province, but I think it'll behave differently here.
I'm just curious, like on a molecular level, like it's a misfolded protein, so why is it so host specific? You'd think there would be so much conserved evolution that like any mammal that comes into contact with this prion.
I'm sorry, I misunderstood your question.
So it's susceptible.
I think every species has normal prions in their tissue. They actually have a function. It's these misfolded ones that cannot be broken down metabolically that build up in the system. Why it's species specific, I think it just depends on the species. Like they've tried to take the deer abnormal prion and put it into monkeys, and if you infect them by injecting into the spinal canal or cerebral fluid, you can infect them, but not if they're eating it orally. So I think it just really depends on the dose and the susceptibility of that species. But yeah, species are different.
So
Yeah.
to get to the deer in the first place, they had to be where they kept all the...
I think it just had to overwhelm. It's just overwhelming, and it's like BSE was created because they ground up scrapie infected sheep and fed it to the cattle, and I guess there probably was a lot of it.
So it just depends on like mode of entry and how much.
Yeah, absolutely.
How much of the protein is actually contaminating the environment.
Yeah, I think so. I think so.
It's basically just a density thing.
Yeah. Yeah, they're learning stuff all the time now. They're for doing surveillance now. They're going to marking areas where bucks will pee on the ground and rub their scent glands on trees and stuff. And they're actually recognizing CWD in those locations rather than having to sample animals now. So they're evolving a whole bunch of things. They're trying to develop a vaccine for it. There's a lot of work going on. It's really, really interesting stuff. So do some reading. Yeah. Because you've obviously got a brain.
I'll have to confess that I'm a biochemist, was a biochemist at the University of Saskatchewan, and I actually taught that students. But to answer some of the questions this gentleman has been asking is that what's quite clear is that the ability of prions to cross species borders from the mad cow disease outbreaks that we had is that they are incredibly low in infectivity, because it became clear in later years that prions were appearing in milk.
Interesting.
Particularly in the sheep
Really?
series.
Yeah.
And you start thinking about the amount of infected milk that was distributed
Yeah,
into
no
the
kidding.
human population.
Yeah.
It was huge before we knew it was a problem.
Yeah.
And yet we had tiny number of cases. And one of the biggest problems in the transmission between into humans was using some brain tissues in certain medical procedures.
Oh, is that right?
Yes.
I didn't realize that.
And I remember a slide from an expert who said had cows 10, medics 30, or to make the point.
Yeah.
That it was that some of the things that we did were much more dangerous than even the eating of them. And the other thing about
It's like Kuru
you can
too. Yeah.
contaminate a facility or a lab from a bacteria or a virus, but you literally have to burn the place down to get rid of the prions.
Yeah.
They're very stable, and they will hang around in the environment for a long, long time.
Yeah.
But they are incredibly poorly infected.
Which is a very good thing.
That's a really good point. And honestly, I'm glad you're here.
And the other thing is, if we live to 130,
We're all going to be nuts.
we're all going to get the human variant.
Yeah.
of mad cow disease. It's just an inevitability.
Yeah.
Hurts,
So there's also a disease called Kuru that was recognized. Yeah, you heard about that?
Both of those,
Yeah. And then there's variants that we are just learning about now. Scandinavia has seen CWD in reindeer and moose there, and they've recognized that they're different variants. So the more you look, the more you're likely to find, but it's terrifying.
It's a crazy disease because you just get a misfolded protein and
Yeah.
then it just causes a chain reaction and then you're done.
Well, you know, I think it's just because it deposits in the wrong place. Like if it deposited in your muscle, it wouldn't be such a big deal, but it deposits in the brain, and the brain's pretty stressed out anyway.
It's a neurological disease, so it has
Yeah.
to get into your neurons.
Yeah, yeah.
You might become a minister of health or something in the U.S. if you get brain.
Yeah, no kidding.
What is the brainworm that RFK Jr.?
I don't know. I have no idea. I don't know if it's a brain worm or
It just,
a genetic issue. I don't know. The guy's nuts.
Did you say anything about raccoon roundworm?
No, I did not.
let's talk about raccoon roundworm.
Okay, let's talk about raccoon roundworms. So raccoons have a roundworm that's quite a nice big size roundworm, like a trophy roundworm. And it lays an egg that is incredibly resistant. In fact, you pretty much need a flamethrower to kill it. Fortunately, raccoons poop in latrines in big piles, but you probably could eat raccoon poop and not be affected at all. But once the egg matures and develops into an infective stage, it's a really, really nasty parasite because it only really likes to be a roundworm in raccoons. If something else eats it, such as a squirrel or a human, it tends to have a real predilection, the larval stage, to go into nervous tissue. So if you ever see a crazy squirrel, it may have, like people with rehab facilities that bring in raccoons and then put another species in that cage, they quite often get neurological diseases. But I don't know if there's really been very many cases diagnosed with raccoon roundworm, but Balis ascaris is a nasty, nasty parasite, and if you do have raccoons pooping on your property, really treat that very carefully. At least the old poop. The fresh poop's not so bad.
Lots of raccoons for now, but what I would like to know is what we're going to do about all the deer. Can we not sterilize them or something?
What do you want to do with the deer? I think you have to have a conversation about what's too much, and how many is too much. You're never going to count them on this island.
And they have them all year round.
You have to look at behavior of the residents as well as the deer. And if you're friendly to the deer, they're going to be friendly to you. If you don't want deer in your garden, you're going to have to fence them out. And if they are in your garden and you don't want them there, get a pot and a pan and scare them off. Use a guard dog.
Slingshot or whatever. It's hard to get rid of them and scare them.
You're talking about a deer culture that has been nurtured for probably decades to be comfortable around people. And
I've been here for over 30 years, and I'm just shocked at how there's still so many, and there are these neighbors and people that feed them
yeah.
and encourage them to be around, and so on and so on.
Yes.
What happens with some deer, like I've been down at Magic Lake sometimes and seen a doe that had what I call like ski feet, for want of a better word. She didn't have proper hooves. She had
overgrown hooves.
Yeah.
Yeah.
But I mean, they were massive. And
That can be
bobbing along.
That can be a genetic thing.
Yeah.
It can also be associated with being fed too high a carbohydrate
In a
diet.
case like that, does a society or a group of people leave it?
Yeah,
Or
you leave it.
get put down because this animals in the right a lot
Who's
of
going to put it down?
pain and whatever hobbling around.
Yeah, should be put down.
Yeah.
Yeah. There's nobody to do it.
I just felt sorry.
Yeah, you should. Yeah.
So we're coming up on Pender Midnight. So if anyone has any other questions, I'm sure we can hang around a little bit longer, but I think this was a good way to end because it's starting the conversation around what do we do as a community. So we'll stay tuned. We'll continue the conversation. And thank you very much, Helen, for coming to Pender.
You're so welcome. And for those of you that have burning questions, I'm sure Erin can share my email with you. And